stations again. Looking for a familiar song, or a friendly voice, only to find yourself here. You're listening to Black Hole Radio. Orb. Only the internal world, one's own mind, is certain to exist. Knowledge of the external world is necessarily only inferred. Because one can only access one's own consciousness, one cannot fundamentally verify that others aren't mere automata. Consequently, anything appearing to exist outside the self may be entirely hallucinatory. The house exuded anonymity. It was a squat blue two-story with a single bay garage attached on the right and a broad front porch. By the steps, a gnarled yew hedge stood sentinel. Inside, pale light crept through the blinds like ghostly fingers. Chuck Mercer woke up coughing. He'd had a bad cold for days, and it only seemed to be getting worse. His eyelids stuck together, and phlegm quivered in his throat. He sat up and reached for the glass on the table. The ginger ale was warm and flat, soothing the tickle in his throat. He didn't want to get up yet. He sank back and threw an arm across his face. Everything ached. His sinuses were throbbing. He drew slow, deep breaths through his mouth, and just as he began to drift off again, his watch started screeching. A strangled groan escaped him as he fumbled at his wrist, his fingers clumsy with lethargy. The insistent beep of the watch stopped. He rolled onto his back, the crook of his elbow a meager shield against wakefulness. Nausea clung to him. It hammered him with mallets of mucus. He reached a languid hand toward the lamp switch, which clicked hollowly. The darkness did not lift. The power was out. Clearing his throat, his face a pulpy mask mashed against his palms, he nearly lulled himself back into a sitting stupor. Sometime later, downstairs, Chuck filled a steel percolator at the faucet. Coarse grounds were spooned into the basket, and the blessed vessel placed upon the gas stove. A small mercy on this powerless and sickly morning. He could still make hot coffee. By the light of the match he struck to light the burner, the electric pot on the countertop remained a dead monolith, its digital display blank. He slumped into a chair at the table and began tapping two fingers in an impatient tattoo, his thoughts a dull thrum. The acridly comforting aroma of brewing coffee curled through the air. He listened to the slow, wet gurgle, a steady rhythm of gulps, belches, and hiccups. The blue flame beneath popped and hissed. When the coffee was done perking, Chuck rubbed the grit from his eyes and then stood, still sleepily oblivious that the gloom of the kitchen remained unbroken when dawn's herald should have been trumpeting. He poured a cup of the sacred ebony liquid and took a small scalding sip at the counter. As the warmth spread through him, a sound erupted outside. Not the familiar crackle of thunder, but something alien, resonant with an impossible geometry. It reminded him of the hollow sprawling of some child's toy, amplified to a ludicrous scale, an encompassing reverberation that he could feel in his teeth. And again, a drawn-out, sickeningly elastic. Unease welled in Chuck's newly warmed belly. He leaned across the sink, parting the curtains. He squinted, his eyes struggling to reconcile the pale light that bled through the window. He lowered the mug and blinked, once, twice, and then the mundane world dissolved. He was staring into the blackest void. This was no metaphor or poetic flourish. It was the void, an absolute negation punctuated with spatterings of cold pinprick starlight. They bristled, like the goose flesh now crawling up his back, with an alien intensity, like eyes peering through the fabric of reality, maybe watching him. Faint, unimaginable galaxies spiraled, quasars pulsed unholy light among other unknowable masses which defied comprehension. Their gravity seemed to hint at dimensions beyond mortality. And from the deepest gulfs of existence, all of these celestial horrors seemed to be calling to him. Throughout this terrifying panorama were cavernous reaches of utter nothingness, a profound absence that swallowed light and dark alike. His gaze was dragged closer. Bizarre arcs of light writhed across a translucent, impossibly thin surface. A glistening membrane, an affront to all natural law, curved seamlessly into his peripherals. Hazy patches of undulating color, so faint they cast a literally gray light. His mind, grasping desperately for any meaningful context, quickly latched on to the inadequate analogy of a soap bubble, but one vast enough to encompass a house and pregnant with icy dread. The demented, springy thunder rolled again. Thunder, his fracturing mind now registered, was the result of colossal impacts of debris against the outer surface of this impossible prison. Shards of ice and chunks of black, glittering stone struck the shimmering barrier at oblique angles, bouncing off into the void, disappearing into the alien abyss. Others, on sharper trajectories, broke apart and then lingered, creating a macabre, fractured ballet. And now, reflected in the kitchen window, Chuck's attention was drawn to his own face, a mask of stark, uncomprehending terror. Reeling, the mug slipped from his numb fingers, skittering across the floor in a bony cacophony. A spreading pool of darkness bloomed behind it, a Rorschach blot of spilled coffee, spidery and ominous, seeming to whisper of impending doom. From this angle, the scene in the window could still be interpreted as a simple and earthly night sky. This was a fleeting and pitiful illusion. No, this was more than night. This was a pure negation of all familiarity. His skin crawled and tingled sharply with fear. His heart tapped a frantic rhythm high in the back of his throat. He felt insignificant, a scurrying rodent trapped in his own kitchen. He stared at the coffee spreading on the floor, tendriling, canaling along the grout lines like the legs of a daddy-long-legged spider, reaching for his foot. He recoiled, swallowed against the fear and mucus, and he glanced at his watch. 5 o'clock. The watch might be broken, but a deeper instinct already knew otherwise. The watch, technically speaking, was functioning perfectly. Alien light pulsed on the wall, pale and fundamentally unnatural, an unsettling mockery of dawn. He sprang up, a desperate, insane thought flashing stupidly across his mind. A prank. Some kind of a prank. So less than 25 feet from the threshold of reality itself, he stumbled into the living room, tearing the curtains aside in a frantic gesture of desperation. "Hello," the void could have boomed, but did not. The silence was more profound, more terrifying than any sound. Still, his mind recoiled from the undeniable truth. Galaxies swam into view, seeming for a moment impossibly close, their nebulous arms writhing like tentacles unraveling toward him. He stumbled around the corner, up the stairs, back into the sanctuary that was his bedroom, where now he realizes, of course, he must still be asleep, trapped within the suffocating embrace of a nightmare, tossing and turning. Yes, the simple act of throwing the door open in this phantasmal realm would surely shatter the illusion, rescuing him from the terrible depths of his own subconscious. The bed, of course, was empty, and the window, the open window here, seemed eager to corroborate the impossible tale of the others. So utterly fantastical, so demonstrably terrible that its blunt plainness becomes its most damning feature. The nightmare descended to cataclysm. With a strangled cry, he slammed the window shut, the sound a pathetic bark swallowed by the oppressive silence all around. A cold sensation began to coil in his stomach, as if icy steel cables were being winched up the back of his throat. He half-stepped, half fell into the small windowless bathroom. The vile contents of his stomach erupted against the porcelain bowl like a gunshot. His muscles racked in sadistic spasms, and another viscous glob spattered into the bowl. After an eternal minute, he wiped his mouth with a trembling hand and leaned back on his haunches, strained lungs sucking in sufficient air. A fish out of water. He rocked himself slowly up to his feet, bracing against the cold porcelain of the sink. His gaze drifted across the hallway into the bedroom, toward the window there, where the light pulsated like ectoplasm, which saturated every edge and angle. Drawing a ragged breath and holding it, he walked with stone-like inevitability to the window. He forced himself to look, and continue looking, swallowed whole by the throat of the universe. Absurdity. Stark and true absurdity. The cosmos squirmed and lurched in every conceivable direction from wherever his focus went, as if its very existence depended on his horrified observation. Stars winked out of existence, others winked in. Impossible trees growing and falling silently in an endless dark forest. The insane maw beckoned an ancient chasm within him, and the converging negative spaces offered only two paths: to be trod pointlessly, or succumbed to entirely. Gargantuan galaxies and nebulae hung at varying absurd distances, their incomprehensible scale rendering all attempts to understand their nature inconceivable. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his hand groping while his eyes remained affixed to the terrifying vista beyond. His bones felt hollow. A chilling certainty settled upon him. He was not insane. The lingering sting in his throat, the razor-sharp flavor of his own vomit, was what affirmed this horrifying new reality. Everything beyond the window was real. He could see that with dreadful clarity. His gaze fell upon his cell phone, lying on the bedside table beside the useless lamp, the half-empty glass of water, the abandoned book. He picked it up, its smooth coolness a stark contrast to the clammy sweat of his palm. No signal, and the time, of course, was frozen at 5 o'clock. He was not surprised, but the unseen cables in his throat tightened another notch all the same. He pressed the device to his forehead with both hands, as if to will a connection into existence. He looked again at the small screen, its faint glow receding, then returning to its own utter blackness. An eerie, seemingly misplaced, or perhaps lost, beam of light ebbed into the room, and paused, and then flowed out into the hallway. A clear violation of all sensible physics. He tried to ignore the wrongness of it, and could not. He picked up the book and flipped it open to a random page. He scanned 2 sentences, the words dissolving into meaningless glyphs. The weight of cold, daunting unreality crashed down over and over across him. He began the aimless, frantic behavior that any trapped animal eventually begins, pacing from room to room, window to window, stealing nervous glances at potential exits. The taunting front door, the mocking back door, the ominous basement door. Chuck tried to call his mother, his father, friends, everyone. Efforts he knew would be fruitless, but was helpless not to try. He stared out the living room picture window at the swirling arm of a galaxy which looked poised to crash down on his home at any moment, were it not separated by unimaginable light years. In the kitchen, he reached for the front door, his hand hovering over the cold metal of the knob. Instinctively, a sliver of detached logic suggested that the outside could be no more perilous than inside. The bubble, or orb, whatever it was, whatever its nature, was the true barrier. But as the latch clicked softly under his touch, the thought of going out there conjured phantom wires, white-hot with terror, sizzling beneath his skin like parasites. He did not open the door, not yet. He cycled through the rooms, a prisoner in his own home. He continued to try his phone until the battery died forever. He attempted to lose himself in the book and actually managed a page or two before the sickening resonated against the unseen membrane separating him from oblivion. The loaded revolver in the nightstand drawer became a recurring temptation. He wished he had never bought the damn thing, and would later discover it ineffective anyway. Hours bled into indistinguishable days. He did not sleep. He could not sleep. He found himself running, crawling, screaming silent, unheard pleas into the void. And for what? He did not know, and there was no one to answer. And if there were, they wouldn't have known either. This was the totality of Chuck's understanding when finally, collapsing onto the edge of his bed, exhausted, unrelenting seasickness wringing his guts, and the persistent prickling at the nape of his neck, he was overwhelmed by a sudden, irrational gratitude. gratitude for the bed. He felt himself fall backward into the meager comfort. He watched the alien light. The very luminescence of the imprisoning orb itself seemed to snap at the blades of the still and silent ceiling fan, where he thought, or hallucinated, he could see his own face reflected back, distorted in a temporal chrome, a stolen image with an unholy rhythm. Was it ticking? His eyes drooped. He knew he was dissolving into nonsense, a meaningless mote adrift, undiscoverable among cosmic indifference. He closed his eyes, the motion slow and heavy. He was submerged, utterly consumed by blunt and suffocating incoherence. And sometime around when his watch would have been dutifully marking the time correctly for the 6th or 7th time, he did not fall asleep. Sleep itself rose from the abyss and dragged him down. His consciousness dissolved into blessed nothingness. The uncaring universe wheeled past the window above his head, and his watch blinked. 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock. Sometime later, he awoke to his watch beeping again. He squeezed the button. No other movement seemed possible or even necessary. There was nothing to be done, nowhere to be gone. He drifted, an hour or an eternity passing with equal meaninglessness. Nightmares flickering on both sides of his eyelids. He had pulled the blanket over his head, a pathetic attempt to deny the horrors that lurked in the shadows of his own room, the malevolent sentience he imagined residing in the shapes of familiar furniture. The incessant prickling of goose flesh persisted, and a chilling realization dawned on him. It may not only be the manifestation of his fear and terror, but perhaps a symptom, an effect of the imprisoning orb itself. The distinction, of course, was impossible to test, and therefore irrelevant. It was there, a constant crawling dread upon his skin. Tossing the blanket aside, he lay on his back, watching the alien light pulsate, an impossibly organic obscenity. His gaze drifted across the familiar surfaces of the room, the wall adorned with framed photographs, and an unsettling quiet permeated the space, broken only by the faint, squelching sound of his eyeballs shifting in their sockets. An unnerving hyper-awareness of his own bodily functions descended, the imagined sensation of his organs grinding and churning within him. His lungs expanded and contracted. His heart thumped like a red rubber ball. His stomach gurgling and protesting. He tried to shake the unease of these awarenesses and could not. Leaning on one elbow, squinting through the drear, he scanned the faces in the photographs again. Voices, their voices he vaguely assumed, skipped across the fractured landscape of his memory like smooth stones, only to sink into the murky depths. Some internal alarm, cold and insistent, rang within him. He did not recognize a single face, could not summon a single name, or even recall the timbre of the voices from just a moment ago. Nothing, worse than nothing, a terrifying uncertainty gnawed at him. Had the photos changed, or had he forgotten these people? He rubbed his eyes with the backs of his hands. A family, a young man in a graduation cap, a smiling couple on their wedding day, children laughing, their pure eyes beaming in innocence, now a distant and alien concept to Chuck, captured in time like iridescent decaying silk. The photographs were not changing before his eyes, but their significance had warped, twisted into something cold and alien. Some atavistic part of him understood that these images were of him and his own family. They must be. Yet a cold sweat slicked his palms, suddenly realizing he must be in some of these photos, but he cannot place even himself. The unfamiliar, sickening frustration returned, amplified now to an unbearable pitch. What is my name? The query resonated like the scraping of bone against ancient stone. Of course, the vessel knew its name. Charles. Chuck. And yet a wrongness clung to it like an infected sliver. It was somehow too simple to believe, like the meaningless syllables John, or Tom, or Tiplotaclazon. Any utterance, repeated too often, bleeds away a sliver of its reality with each iteration. Desolate memories, stripped of their significance, fetid and viscous, roiled within him. Quivering, stranded globules upon low-tide sucky and rank leavings. His name now felt like a chitinous thing, a carapaced beast, scuttling with insane urgency after a receding and unknowable sea. When he saw his reflection in the small bathroom mirror, his hands claws that clutched the edge of the sink, the eyes looking back showed no desire for a name. It had left him in favor of senseless drowning, and now his own face was that of a stranger, despicably indifferent and dwelling instead in some lightless, alien comprehension. He entombed the photographs face down in the dresser's bottom drawer and exited the bedroom. He knew he had not cleaned the spilled coffee. Certainty, born from his dread that he had not been the agent of any such task. What species of lunatic, given the circumstances, would have been? But the kitchen floor stretched before him, unnervingly pristine. His limbs felt like lead as he stood at the counter, his gaze drawn to a particular mug in the cupboard, the one that belonged amidst the spectral stain on the floor. His head cocked with a jerky, almost comical animation, but the impetus for the movement dissolved instantly in his thickening mental fog. Did I what? He peered through the window, not wanting to, but needing to. He saw a single star pulse with an unsettling vibrancy and then wink out. His head began to swim. He needed to sit. And then came the sound. A dull, insidious noise from the shadowed corners, like a sodium lamp flickering in the far distance, or something smaller and infinitely more disturbing. Isolated, starved of external stimuli, the mind conjures its own terrors. The rhythmic pulse of the heart may become the war drum of an unseen foe. Blood rushing through the ear canal transmutes into a monster's presence in the next room. But this hollow staccato, now emanating from beneath the refrigerator, bore an undeniable autonomy. It was insectile, growing now in volume and rapidity. It ceased as suddenly as it had begun, as though its producer had detected something of great interest. If his watch still ticked, the seconds here would have dilated into eons, and in a sense they did. In the dense closeness of the room, he saw with growing, frozen horror. Tenebrous black tendrils unfurled from the gap beneath the refrigerator. They flowed like viscous shadows, diverging, canaling along the tile grout, spreading across the floor. The nameless man, his features sharpened in sallow starlight, fused to his chair as he watched. A grotesque gargoyle, a human chair amalgamation, welded together, cursed to witness the unfolding horror by some mad quantum fluke, a glitch in his flesh or the chair's wood, it made no difference which. The refrigerator shuddered and lurched forward. Its door swung open, expelling invisible plumes of putrid decay. A blasphemous entity squalled a grating caterwaul from the shadows. The dark spindles attenuated to the edges of the tiles and began to tug. Along the minuscule gap at its base, no more than a sliver of absolute blackness, a cephalopodin mass compressed and contracted with grotesque rhythm, methodically extruding itself from some other, even more unimaginable dimension. The fiend bawled an eerily human cry. The bulbous thorax, a grotesque distortion of a human brain, quivered in the murk like a heat shimmer. Taut, licorice black appendages clattered and slapped against the cold tile floor. Clicking pedipalps and mouthparts twitched. Globular, marble eyes blinked one at a time. The doom spider fell silent, and initially paid him no mind. Pedipalps tapped a haunting rhythm against its own segmented face. Then the spider, the schismatic nightmare, fixed its gaze upon him. A man's eyes and a beast's, locked in a single moment of inarticulable, terrifying familiarity, as if both were equally surprised by the other's unwelcome presence. For a heartbeat, the beings froze within a distorted frame of reality. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of ozone and something ancient like dried blood. The ghastly beast, hideous and hateful beyond definition, did not attack, but lumbered toward the door. It attempted to push it open, scraping and tapping against the door with horrific futility, its thumbless appendages useless against the simple apparatus. The thing emitted a new sound, still monstrous and deranged, but with some apparent weary resignation, some repulsive breed of exasperation. Twin eye stalks, nauseating in their length and limberness, contracted and twisted, again finding the man's petrified stare. They held a weariness and almost expectant quality. Without a thought, without reason, something drew him forward. The flesh man was standing. The blood man screamed within. The bone man beneath them both leaned forward, his arms stretching with a desperate, involuntary urge. The flesh man's skin brushed against the fibrous cilia lining one monstrous gaunt limb. 1,000 phantom stings erupted there, and the flesh man screamed as the blood man screamed even louder. The bone man twisted the knob and pushed the door open. The doom spider seemed to regard him with mournful gratitude. The obscene clicking of mouthparts had ceased, and it went out. When the abomination reached the midpoint of the yard, he dared take a hesitant step onto the porch. He felt suddenly as though he were attending some ancient, ritualistic funeral procession, or a sacrifice, one which had been enacted perhaps countless times before and countless times to come. His hands gripped the door frame, poised to slam the door shut the instant the doom spider should turn around, as if it had forgotten something, its fangs no longer concealed, ready to rend and devour. It did not turn back. The abomination reached the edge of the yard. It paused, an alien uncertainty glinting in its multifaceted eyes, at the boundary of what was and what was not. The edge was no more than a shimmering white line, the tripwire of oblivion. All dreams smolder and die here. The doom spider, however, understood the business of traversing strange and terrifying barriers with a chilling proficiency. It knew this time would be different. This was the final threshold. It lifted one leg and touched the shimmering edge of the orb. The entire thing palpitated, disturbing light flashed briefly, hypnotizing both the man and the doom spider. It turned its gaze back toward the house. Alarmingly human eyes, somber, suddenly blazed adamantly at the man it knew perhaps as well as he did himself. And, thinking these things in whatever way the unutterable creatures of the shadows can be said to think, pushed forward. Its bulk sliced into the void, passing through the shimmer. The black mass at its core warbled with an unholy resonance. The glowing within its brain-like thorax flickered erratically. Legs splayed in a grotesque parody of swimming. The doom spider drifted, its gaze returning to the man, a palpable struggle evident in its alien features. The man saw raw, visceral dread. The doom spider's eyes blinked, slow and wet. Tears, yes, tears squirted forth and froze into perfect crystalline teardrops that tinkled against the shimmering orb. After a final, desperate plea in its gaze, "Look at me, look now," the doom spider shrank and shrank and shrank. Its legs thrashed in contortionist silhouettes against the back stars, fighting some unseen predator from the abyssal depths of its own nightmares, or, perhaps, simply suffocating in the cosmic vacuum. And then it was gone. Time passed, or didn't. The concept of time itself had become more ritual than reality, a ritual soon discarded entirely. His body now moved only when necessary. Ancient, deathless muscles creaked. He sat most days on the porch. Alien flora, repugnant and strange plants took root, spreading like mold from dark corners. Fungi with blinking nodes, unnervingly eye-like, seemed to watch him. The plants grew thick, sickly greens and radiant purples, subtle blues and ghastly yellows. Years had whirred into a haze since the doom spider. Millennia drained like grains of sand in an hourglass. The memory of the beastly thing now held a chilling clarity, a dawning comprehension that twisted the initial terror into something far more personal, something worse than a simple monstrosity. He understood in time, with a certainty that settled deep in his marrow, that the monstrous entity had not been external horror, not alien at all, but a manifestation sprung from the deepest recesses of his own fractured psyche. It was a projection, some desperate fragment of his subconscious that had glimpsed the unbearable, eternal torment stretching before him. the endless eons of solitary witness to cosmic entropy, and had opted for any escape, any form, even one monstrous and fleeting, just to find oblivion quickly. The spider's desperate lurch into the void was not the flight of some alien beast, but the suicidal plunge of a terrified inner self. Now, only the echoing silence and strangely evolved plants remained, testaments to a horror that was both external and intimately, devastatingly internal. The silence within the decaying house was no longer just the absence of sound, it was a suffocating blanket woven from the threads of demise. He remained on the porch, a skeletal effigy amidst the riotous growth of ghastly and putrid alien flora. Their forms defied classification, pulsed with a sickly bioluminescence. Vine-like tendrils snaked through the rotted structure like limbs of some subterranean horror. The sentinel yew hedge moaned. The house was now a crumbling reliquary, a monument to a life irrevocably lost to the vulgarity of space and time. In the living room, spectral figures of his former family sometimes sat in sorrow, their vacant eyes fixed on some internal chasm, utterly oblivious to the dissolution unfolding outside the picture window. Echoes of a life that had faded to cosmic dust, now inexplicably thrust back into existence in this room they had no memory of, dragged back from the swamp of death, dripping despair. They did not recognize him, and he did not recognize them. Trapped in a cosmic tempest of unreality, perpetual twilight, punctuated only by the eerie glow of the vegetation and the shifting, kaleidoscopic patterns that danced across the still pristine walls of the hateful orb, he was a solitary anchor in a sea of entropy, a fixed point as the universe spiraled into its final cold embrace. His physical form continued its transformation. His flesh stretched and translucent over pencil-thin bones, his skull a nearly perfect orb of its own now, swollen and ghastly. The mind within remained sharp, however incomplete, all glowing with an inner light as if the very fabric of his being was beginning to dissolve, a mercy if indeed so. He remained intact, preserved in this bizarre bubble of temporal distortion, an unwilling immortal, condemned to witness the universe's demise. His consciousness persisted with a strange, unwavering clarity. He observed the strange behaviors of space-time, the fading starlight, the slow death of galaxies. He felt the subtle vibrations of collapsing stars, the true darkening of all, except, of course, for himself. His thoughts, once tethered to the concerns of a human life, now roamed the vast empty corridors of the cosmos, contemplating the rise and fall of celestial empires, the fleeting brilliance of supernovae, the cold, indifferent beauty of the nothingness within black holes, slowly evaporating, the unseeable final vestiges of all reality. Eons stretched into incomprehensible eternity. He sat on the ancient porch, a silent sage in a temple of cosmic ruin, his white hair and beard flowing around him like the frozen currents of nebulas long since faded away. He could perceive the faint whispers of creation's last echoes, the mournful sigh of entropy's triumph. After a span that dwarfed the lifespan of the universe he was carried away from screaming so long ago, so long it seems to have never happened at all. Slowly, impossibly slowly, he opened his eyes. The transformation was not only physical, but fundamental, molecular. The eyelids peeled back for the first time in 1 billion years, to reveal not the weary gaze of a man, but a new universe, vast and teeming, created and imprisoned within his own mind. New galaxies spiraled in majestic silence, their arms adorned with the light of new stars. Nebulae like brushstrokes painted breathtaking vistas of color against the darkness. He saw the intricate, unseen web of dark matter, the skeletal framework upon which the former cosmos had hung, now slowly unraveling. Colors beyond comprehension shimmered and pulsed. Shapes defied the rigid laws of Euclidean geometry, twisting and folding impossible dimensions. He perceived fundamental forces weakening, the very fabric of reality fraying, revealing glimpses of the utter void beyond. He was a microcosm of the dying cosmos, a living record containing the fading echoes of existence, the weight of uncounted eons, the totality of history, the profound understanding of entropy's victory, all resided within the infinite depths of his gaze, forever contemplating the grand, tragic arc of creation and destruction. The final lesson, the ultimate, inexorable clarity to come, was this. In all the time and all the not time which had passed, or hadn't, tumbling senselessly into the bleakest darkness, every star, every point of light which had come and gone like grains of sand, were not stars at all. No. They, too, in quantities beyond any meaningful numeration, were other wretched orbs, and, dwelling eternally within each of them, screaming into the void in their own unfamiliar voices, were the minds and souls of every living thing which had ever or will ever exist across every universe. Every being thrust into life that breathes, sleeps, feeds, and mates is only hurtling through their own fleeting and tragically minuscule lives toward the same relentlessly maddening, eternal fate. He had witnessed the universe's birth, its brief, incandescent moment of glory, and its long, drawn-out demise, and so too would all other consciousnesses. He had seen the rise and fall, the ephemeral brilliance of stars, diabolical in their true nature, and the silent dance of the cosmic dust which all became, and in the end he remained, a solitary sentinel on a crumbling porch, totally isolated, but never truly alone in his experience, no, in truth, as far from alone as it is possible to get. His eyes, and countless others, now held the memories of a universe that was, and the vast, empty potential of what might be. The silence of the dying cosmos resonated infinite wisdom, bound within uncountable, unshareable testaments to the unbearable beauty and ultimate futility of everything.